through our partners at CAI on the Cape and Islands and New England Public Media in Springfield.
Obviously, this debate is going to look and feel pretty different from those we've done in the past. There's no audience, there's no handshakes. Jim and I are seated 7 feet apart from each other with plexiglass in between, and we were both voluntarily tested ahead of this debate. As for the candidates, each is in a separate studio by himself to ensure the highest level of safety.
So yes, a lot of changes. What haven't changed are the rules, of which there are none. As usual here at GBH, there's no opening statement, no closings, no time limits, although we do have a lot to get through. So please do not filibuster. And as always, we'll be keeping track of speaking time to keep things relatively even. Margery?
Good to see you both, and thanks very much for joining us. So
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for being here. So we're going to start with masks this evening. Obviously, the mask issue became huge this weekend, Friday, 1 o'clock in the morning, when the president tweeted that both he and his wife, Melania, have tested positive for coronavirus. A University of Washington study projects that 160,000 more people could die by January 1st, but that number could be reduced by 96,000 if nearly all of us, 95% of us, wore masks. So let's start with you, Kevin O'Connor. Do you support a mask mandate where it's legally permissible?
A mandate?
Yes.
I don't support a mandate. I think that there are appropriate guidelines that people should follow, and certainly within confined spaces, yes, then I think it's appropriate to regulate what's going on.
When you say there are appropriate guidelines for people to follow, Mr. O'Connor, I check both of your Twitter accounts pretty regularly, and I checked yours on Thursday, October 1st. There was a photograph of you shoulder to shoulder with a Boston Herald staffer, shoulder to shoulder with comedian Lenny Clark, and inches away from 5 customers at the Owl Diner in Lowell. None of them had masks. You didn't have a mask. How is that following the guidelines?
Well, the guidelines talk about duration of contact, that all contact is not equal. I moved in for photographs and then separated.
Senator Markey, you do support a mask mandate, I believe, correct?
I do support a mask mandate. I think it's consistent with all the public health guidelines that Tony Fauci and public health physicians all across the country have been advising us to abide by.
But one of the
Margery, if I could just speak to this, today's arrangements, which were at the 11th hour, are not consistent with any guidelines. Senator Markey and I agreed to a set of guidelines with WGBH that were changed this morning. Nothing has changed in terms of public health guidelines. Nothing has changed in terms of my condition or Senator Markey's condition. But what we saw was a changing of the rules by people with the power to do it.
Mr. O'Connor, can I respond to that, please? If I may, one, we apologize. We did change the rules late because our view is the world changed on Friday and we tried to change with it. Our goal was to make things as safe for both of you and us as possible. We'd much prefer to have you in here, but the reality is this is what it is. So we'd love to get to the merits.
But Jim, nothing did change. The guidelines that we agreed to were carefully agreed to. They were safe, they were sound, and nothing has changed from a public health perspective.
We didn't think they were safe enough, Mr. O'Connor. Our apologies.
But
so can we get back? You interrupted. Can we get let Senator Markey respond to Margery's question, please?
Well, I was just going to ask, Senator. Many people have said that there isn't any good to a mandate if there aren't fines and strict enforcements. There have been $300 fines in some parts of Massachusetts. So do you think that we need that kind of strict enforcement plus fines?
Yes, I do think we're going to need enforcement going forward. Obviously, the numbers that you just outlined, 96,000 more deaths, which are avoidable if we have a mask mandate. Obviously, that's something that requires everyone to cooperate, and with penalties if people don't. The masks are less for your own health than to protect other people as well from the exposure. The tweet from President Trump this afternoon was irresponsible as he was leaving the hospital. He said, don't be afraid of the coronavirus or it will dominate your life. The reality is that if you're not afraid of coronavirus, it will dominate your life. And we see that right now, and a mandate for wearing masks, along with, by the way, other public health safeguards, including obviously social distancing and And washing your hands is absolutely essential to reduce.
Mr. O'Connor, if I can I unite the Trump and COVID topics, if I may? The president recently gave himself an A+ for how he's handling the pandemic. We want to know if you believe that grade was appropriate, and how would you also grade our governor here in Massachusetts, who closed early and opened pretty cautiously, which caused them to get a lot of heat from many business people in this state? How would you grade both of them?
I think the grades are both incomplete. I think that they each have done things well, and I'm sure in hindsight they would look back and do things differently. I do favor opening up safely as soon as possible. I'm very concerned about the collateral consequences of being closed. I have a 4th grader and an 8th grader, and I see the consequences for them academically. And I also see the consequences in terms of social isolation that we're seeing in terms of reported increases in the suicide hotline, alcoholism, things of that nature. So I think we can, the reality is that we can be both safe and open our economy and open our schools.
Senator, I'd like to hear what you think about both Baker and Trump's performance, but when you answer, I'd like to put something else on the table. As you know, the House Democrats reduced the size of their coronavirus relief package from $3 trillion to 2.2. Senate package was very small. The ante was up by the White House to $1.6 trillion from the Treasury Secretary. Nancy Pelosi said a flat no. Is she not holding hostage millions of American families, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of businesses and state governments? And do you support her flat no, or are you amongst those who won't let the perfect be the enemy of the good? Would you buy the White House compromise to get relief to people now?
Well, first, I would give Donald Trump a complete failing grade for the way in which he's handled the coronavirus. He's been criminally negligent since January. I called upon him in the middle of January to brief Congress on the coronavirus before it got here. He did not do it. I then called upon him on January 27th to name a coronavirus czar. He did not do it. I was the first senator to call upon him to use the Defense Production Act to produce the testing, the PPE, the tracing technologies that would be necessary. He did not do it. So he's been criminally negligent all the way up until leaving the hospital and telling people not to be afraid of the coronavirus.
Of course.
With regard to Charlie Baker, I would say that his grade is incomplete. He's worked hard, but of course he's been hindered by the fact that Donald Trump did not provide early on the leadership, all the supplies needed. But with regard to nursing homes, especially where 2/3 of the deaths that occurred in the state occurred there, from Holyoke to Chelsea to private nursing homes, obviously something went very wrong when 2/3 of the deaths occurred there, and we have to make sure that does not happen
Senator,
again.
speaking of negligence, isn't Nancy Pelosi negligent saying no to $1.6 trillion and keeping people on the edge across this country until she gets every nickel she wants?
Absolutely not. Nancy Pelosi is fighting for the funding which our hospitals, for which our schools, for which our cities and towns need. And that need is desperate, and that lack of willingness to negotiate by the Republicans, that obstinate opposition to the real funding that is necessary is absolutely
Treasury
on
Secretary
the White House.
Mnuchin tripled the Senate offer. He tripled it to $1.6 trillion, Senator.
It is not enough to match the magnitude of the threat to our health, to our economy, to small businesses, to hospitals, to community health centers, for the unemployment benefits which people need in Massachusetts, which has been discontinued since August 1st. On all of those issues, the Republicans still have refused to put in the funding levels that are necessary to deal with the magnitude of this
Mr.
problem.
O'Connor, would you vote for the Senate, for the White House deal, which is 3 times what Mitch McConnell wants to do?
Yes, absolutely. And Senator Markey's been an extremist throughout. He has never offered any moderation whatsoever on this issue. And I also want to note, in terms of coronavirus, that he is very highly charged rhetoric regarding the president. I went to the same law school as Senator Markey, and his statements are misguided, to put it mildly. But in addition, what we've never heard throughout this campaign is any question as to the fault of the Communist Chinese Party in causing all of this. Senator Markey has a long record of weakness in terms of dealing with China, and his weakness on a sustained basis poses the greatest threat to American security and American safety.
Let me just say right up the bat, that's just plain wrong. When the president said that he was going to cut off travel from China, I agreed with him, and I said so publicly in the end of January. So
Sir, you've never faulted Communist China throughout this entire campaign. You have politicized this issue.
Again, that is totally...
Senator, it's very personal for me, as you know. My father almost died of COVID-19. My cousin died of it. What we don't need are career politicians politicizing this issue, and that's what you've done. And your failure to point the finger at China and to hold them accountable signals the level of weakness that unfortunately we've seen throughout your long career.
You're just absolutely wrong. When the president said he was cutting off any further flights from China, I agree with him, and I said so publicly in a press conference.
Of course you did.
Well, again,
you should have.
You're just plain wrong on this. The problem is the president did not follow up by naming a SAR.
Senator,
he did not use
Senator,
the
you've
Defense
never
Production Act.
Senator,
He did not provide the moral and personal leadership that the American people needed. And even today, once again, irresponsibly, he's telling people not to be afraid of the coronavirus.
So Senator, China is not at fault? Is that what you're saying, Senator?
I did not say that.
But you haven't said a word throughout the campaign. You are a United States Senator, and your communications have importance in terms of our global stature.
For the third time, Mr. O'Connor, I agreed with the president at the end of January. Let me just restate
It's a record of weakness. Shutting down
Kevin O'Connor, I just want to be clear about one thing. You are blaming Communist China as opposed to the millions of Americans who have been in close contact with each other, not social distancing and not wearing masks. And the president has not worn masks very much himself. You're blaming Communist China for 200,000 plus deaths in the United States?
It started with, well, no problem is so simple as that, Margery. But the reality is it started in Communist China, and the Chinese purposefully and repeatedly misled us. And it's not just American lives around the world. And that lies at the feet of Communist China. And Senator Markey's silence for a year on that issue signals weakness, which is consistent with his record of weakness.
We've got to move ahead, gentlemen. We've got to move ahead, gentlemen.
If I may, just
very
briefly, you know you're a Donald Trump Republican when you don't wear a mask yourself in public, like Mr. O'Connor, just like Donald Trump. You know you're a Trump Republican when you're not willing to talk about the magnitude of the climate threat to our planet and what the solution should be. You know you're a Trump Republican when you support steamrolling a Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, through the Supreme Court in violation of Republican promises to the American people so that the Affordable Care Act, Roe versus Wade, environmental protections will be on the chopping block.
Mr. O'Connor,
just to be clear, Senator Markey has acknowledged that he has a weak record on China, 40 years, a record of weakness.
There is no
gentlemen, we're going to move on.
Yeah, we're going to move
anything
on.
other than I called on China. I agreed with the keeping China out. Who was criminally negligent from the very beginning? It was Donald Trump.
Okay,
He did not put in place the protections which we need.
We've got the China part. Let's move on here. I want to just a couple more minutes on the virus. Senator Markey, you've recommended giving every American $2,000 a month, retroactive to March, for the duration of the pandemic. As you know, that's a lot of money, about $5 trillion that would add up to, which is as big as the federal budget. So how would you propose we pay for that? Well,
I would begin by repealing the Trump tax cuts. I would begin by repealing the Bush tax cuts. President Trump is paying $750 a year in taxes, by the way, while getting the best medical care in the world from the federal government, millions of dollars worth of great health care from the federal government. And then we can use those trillions of dollars to take care of ordinary American families who are suffering right now. We have we have an unemployment rate in Massachusetts, which is in double digits. It's the worst since the Great Depression. These families are at home right now. They're at their kitchen table. They are trying to figure out how to pay the bills, how to pay for rent, how to pay for the mortgage, how to pay for their health care, how to pay for food, how to pay for their car payments. All of that's on the table. We have to provide that funding for those families, and those trillions of dollars should be brought back from those tax cuts,
Kevin O'Connor.
and they should be used for helping ordinary families in the Commonwealth.
Kevin O'Connor, did you support the president's tax cuts, which, as you know, mostly went to wealthy people and have caused the biggest deficit in our history? And what would you do to support people who are still unemployed during this pandemic?
Well, Senator Markey's proposal is $96,000 a year for a family of four dating back to March, regardless of whether those family members are even citizens of the United States. It is a grossly irresponsible proposal. Someone said to me recently, there's nothing more expensive than a free lunch. Ed Markey, throughout this campaign, has proposed these free lunch programs that are totally unaffordable, that will bankrupt future generations, and they are inexcusable.
But do you support the tax cuts, though? Yes or no?
Yes. Well, on balance, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Gentlemen, we're going to move to the Supreme Court.
Jim, if I could, the tax cuts raise more revenue in the year after the tax cut than before, and they led to the greatest economy in the last 40 years. The last time we did that well was quite a long time ago, and everything that got us to that point, Senator Markey opposed.
Mr. O'Connor and Senator Markey, Supreme Court. Senator, you have said if the GOP rams through the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, you would support ending the filibuster and expanding the size of the Supreme Court. Your nominee for president apparently was, quote, annoyed, according to the Washington Post, with your comment. One, do you still support those positions? And is Joe Biden, who wouldn't even answer a question on that issue at the debate the other night, is he wrong not to support those sort of remedies if the Republicans proceed as they appear to be doing?
Yeah, very simply, the Republicans back in 2016 and 17 blocked Merrick Garland as the nominee for Barack Obama, would not allow him to be confirmed. They just swiped that seat for their own purposes. And then they made a promise that they would never nominate anyone for the Supreme Court during a presidential election year. And now the Republicans are trying to steamroll through a nominee right before an election in a coronavirus epidemic up on Capitol Hill.
Senator, no one made that promise.
Just please let me finish. In order to have someone on the Supreme Court who would be able to begin to hear the repeal of the Affordable Care Act legislation in the second week of November of 2020. In addition to that, they would be able to begin the process of rolling back Roe versus Wade, rolling back Massachusetts versus EPA, the most important climate change case in American history, civil rights, rolling back women's rights. And my feeling is, if they do this, if they take these two seats, then it is very much necessary for us in America to repeal the filibuster and to begin a discussion of enlarging the Supreme Court in order to make sure that what the Republicans have done does not wind up in a fundamental change in the protections which we have provided to the American people over the last generation.
The word on the street is you went to the same law school as the senator, I heard somewhere. Are you for or against
law school?
You're for or against expanding the size of the court quickly?
It's court packing is a terrible idea. It's been discredited by everyone. Justice Ginsburg said it was a terrible idea. No one of common sense thinks that Senator Markey's idea is good. And even the Biden campaign thought it was ill-advised. So he's outside the mainstream of his own party, let alone common sense thinkers.
Let's get to Roe v. Wade. Kevin O'Connor, 2 years ago, a Massing poll found that 8 in 10 Massachusetts voters, including Catholics, want Roe v. Wade to be upheld. You said you supported the Trump nominees to Supreme Court, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and they could oppose, they could get rid of Roe v. Wade. So you seem to be out of touch with Massachusetts voters on that. And do you also support Amy Barrett to the Supreme Court?
So in terms of Judge Barrett, she's extremely well qualified and she's lived an extraordinary life. She is a devout Catholic, and some people in Senator Markey's coalition have tried to vilify her for her Catholic faith. But she has expressed respect and reverence for the Constitution and the rule of law. And I think we can expect her to follow those principles. And I think she appears to be a strong justice. That said, I will await the hearing. I'll wait to see what she has to say in response to the answers and to the questions. And I would note Senator Markey, I believe, has said he won't even meet with her face to face.
But you support justices that were appointed to the Supreme Court because they are pro-life. Massachusetts voters have indicated over and over again that they are pro-choice. So how come you support those justices who may end up taking away women's reproductive rights?
The personal position of a judge isn't what's relevant. The question is, will a judge respect the rule of law, the Constitution, and that includes precedent. So Margery, we don't know what these Supreme Court justices will be deciding 10, 20 years from now. We can't have litmus tests. What we need are the best people. We need bright people who are people of character and who have lived responsibly.
Mr. O'Connor, when Margery and I interviewed candidate Trump in New Hampshire, he said, we asked him if he had any litmus tests, and he said yes, that they be pro-life. So the President of the United States has a litmus test. Doesn't really matter if you don't have one, if he does.
Personally pro-life. I don't think that the question has been asked as to what she would do on that case. I would note that justices have, over the course of even recently, followed precedent. They've respected the rule of law.
Okay.
Unlike Senator Markey, who wants to defund our police, pack our Supreme Courts, and now get rid of the filibuster.
We're going to get to those things in just a minute, but I just want to ask Senator Markey, do you support the Roe Act? It's you do support the Roe Act. It's pending on Beacon Hill that would take limit restrictions on abortions post 24 weeks, and some people have called this infanticide, but I know you support it, so explain why.
Well, I support the Roe Act because I think Massachusetts, we're only 2% of America's population, but we have to be the leader in ensuring that we are going to put on the books the protections for women so that the only decision is between a woman and her physician in terms of any healthcare decision which she would make. That should be the way in which we deal with that issue. And we have to be the leader. So from my perspective, yes, what the Republicans are doing is engaging in court packing. They picked up 2 extra justices, and their goal now is to repeal Roe versus Wade. As Jim said, President Trump made it very clear repeatedly that he's going to name justices to the Supreme Court who will overturn Roe versus Wade. That's his goal. He's made it very, very clear. He has made it very clear.
Mr. O'Connor, go ahead.
Please let me finish.
Quickly, please, Senator.
I will. And he has made it very, very clear over and over again, that's his goal. And by the way, what will come after that is the Affordable Care Act, environmental protections, but at the top of the list is this repeal of Roe versus Wade.
We're going to get
and I think Massachusetts has to be the leader in passing state statutes to protect women.
We're going to get to health care and the environment in a second. Mr. O'Connor, do you want to respond to what the Senator just said?
Yes, Senator Markey is within the most extreme group in terms of advocating abortion rights, even at the point of delivery, 9th month, right there. And it's terrible, the things that he's advocated for. He's an extremist, and his views are not consistent with the majority of Massachusetts voters.
You know, Senator, speaking of consistent, you know that the first issue, I think you just mentioned this a minute ago, come before the Supreme Court on November 10th, this new Supreme Court, with or without a 9th justice, will be the Affordable Care Act. Win or lose, your preference is Medicare for all, a provision, an initiative that's not even supported by the man running for president on the Democratic Party. Wouldn't it be better to work to improve the Affordable Care Act as Vice President Biden prefers, rather than, if I may call it that, tilting at windmills when your candidate, even as president, would not support it?
Again, my view is this, that right now we have a healthcare system in America that's a sick care system. We spend twice as much as any other industrialized country in the world. We're 45th in health outcomes in the world. We're 37th in life expectancy in the world. Last year, 2/3 of all personal bankruptcies in the United States were because of healthcare bills. So we have a healthcare system that is broken. And we right now, because of coronavirus, because of this economic recession, we're seeing tens of millions of additional Americans losing their healthcare. Medicare for all is the way in which ultimately we have to go. Yeah, step one is let's protect the Affordable Care Act from being eviscerated by Donald Trump and by people like Mr. O'Connor. But then let us make the transition to a point where everyone in our country is able to access the health care which they need for their families.
So,
Mr.
Mr. O'Connor, if I can, just to be clear, as you know, the president says he's for repeal, as do your fellow Republicans in Washington, for repeal of the Affordable Care Act, though they haven't identified any replacement for almost 4 years that they've been saying they would. He also supports the challenge to the ACA on November 10th. And if successful, the Trump administration and the Republican attorneys general, the protection for those with pre-existing conditions will disappear. Do you support the Affordable Care Act? Do you support the challenge to the Affordable Care Act? Where are you on those two issues?
Well, I just want to note Senator Markey, with his Medicare for All program, would bankrupt Medicare. It is an extreme position, again, outside the mainstream of the Democratic Party. Vice President Biden said during the debate that he is the Democratic Party. He's against Medicare for all. So it is an absolute.
How about the Affordable Care Act and the challenge to it in the Supreme Court?
Well, if there's anything done to it, I want to make sure that pre-existing conditions are covered. That would be a critical priority.
Do you support the challenge to it?
I support a challenge so long as we immediately address the pre-existing conditions.
And where exactly, again,
one thing,
the president has said for 4 years, in 2 weeks, the replacement will come out. Then 2 weeks later, there's been nothing in 4 years. Why would you assume that if the court repeals the Affordable Care Act, that there'll be anything produced by President Trump or your fellow Republicans to protect anybody with pre-existing conditions? They haven't done it yet.
You know, it will be a priority for me as a senator. President Trump has been very good in terms of fighting for prescription drug price reductions and also for greater transparency in terms
what
of
has he done on pre-existing conditions except say he supports them at the same time that his Department of Justice is part of a lawsuit to eliminate them?
Yeah, I don't agree with the pursuit of that lawsuit. I think it's ill-advised at this point. But
if I may, I just would like to
yes,
if I may. Yeah, thank you. You know, Mr. O'Connor, he will be going down to Washington to be a vote with Mitch McConnell on the floor of the United States Senate. They've had 4 years to put together an alternative health care bill to the Affordable Care Act.
Senator,
that is something,
let him
if I may,
finish, Mr.
I did
O'Connor,
not
then I
interrupt
promise
you.
we'll
I
go
did
right
not
back to you.
interrupt you, Mr. O'Connor, please. That the pre-existing conditions will be gone. The guarantee that a parent can have their adult children up to age 26 on their health care will be gone. Making sure that a woman, just her status as a woman is not a pre-existing condition, that will be gone. Making sure there are lifetime caps on the bills which you have to pay for your health care, that will all be gone. That is something that Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate have made as an absolute commitment. They've had 4 years.
Okay, I've got to hold you, Senator, because you got 2 minutes more, but you have to answer in your response to that, Mr. O'Connor. Be clear. Do you support the Affordable Care Act, which includes all the provisions the senator just mentioned, or do you oppose the Affordable Care Act?
I don't support the Affordable Care Act. I support the system we have in Massachusetts, which every state can adopt. It's a great model, and we have great coverage. What Senator Markey wants to do with his socialized medicine is divert dollars away from high-quality providers like we have in Massachusetts. It's a great industry for us, and dollars flow to quality. Senator Markey wants to ignore quality, and it would hurt Massachusetts and hurt our great institutions.
Well, again, just the opposite again. What he calls socialized medicine is called Medicaid. It's the funding from the federal government that goes to our healthcare system in Massachusetts that ensures that hundreds of thousands of people get the healthcare insurance they need.
Senator,
you can call it socialized
Senator,
medicine if you want.
Senator,
how about that,
but,
Senator,
but it only reflects.
Senator Markey wants
I will not interrupt you, please.
Okay.
That the Republican Party has always harbored an ancient animosity towards Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and now the Affordable Care Act. It's anything that has to do with providing health care for ordinary Americans in our country. And this is just the latest battle
Mr.
that we've been
O'Connor.
waging.
Absolutely false. The Massachusetts system was passed by Governor Romney, a Republican. He was a leader. He's a U.S. Senator. He's a Republican. So that's just completely false. Governor Baker, who is endorsing me, not Senator Markey, has provided an excellent system here. It's a good model that can be used by other states. I believe in federal support for pre-existing conditions and appropriate pools.
Mr. O'Connor, the state of Massachusetts gets a ton of money for its, as you call it, very good healthcare system as a result of the Affordable Care Act. Where does that money come from if the act you don't support disappears?
Well, there can be further appropriations, so it's not the end of the game. There's an attack on in terms of this particular case, but there will be subsequent appropriations. And by the way, no one has suggested that the Massachusetts system would end based on this case, not at all.
But I just want to be clear, Mr. O'Connor, what you're talking about is kind of so if the Supreme Court gets rid of the Affordable Care Act, that the rest of the country or other states that don't have what we have in Massachusetts, people there will just have to fend for themselves until something else gets passed, because there's a big gap there. There's a lot of people children under 26 who are on their parents' health insurance, pre-existing conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no guarantee that there's going to be something the next day and people are going to be left in the breach, aren't they?
We'd have Medicare, we'd have Medicaid, we would have private health insurance, and we would have an opportunity for people to bring down health insurance rates through competition, which Senator Markey opposes.
Okay, can we move on?
Yes, but I would like to be clear that Senator Markey advocates for the end of private health insurance. That's what his plan involves. And as Vice President Biden said during the presidential campaign, it's totally unaffordable and would do nothing but hurt people who are already
Senator,
on
brief response.
Well, again, what Mr. O'Connor calls socialized medicine is Medicare. It's Medicaid. It's federal funding that then goes to individuals and institutions in Massachusetts and across the country. That's what it's all about. To pretend that there's some disconnect between the federal money and how our Massachusetts healthcare system works is just absolutely fallacious.
You want
And
to
if it's-
eliminate
and if
private
the-
health insurance,
And if the
Senator.
Republicans...
How about the
if
response to that? How about the response to the private health insurance allegation that Mr. O'Connor is making, Senator?
Again, over time, that's what we have to move to as a model in order to make sure that everyone gets the health care which they need. But in the road to it does not come through the evisceration of Medicaid and Medicare, which is what the Republican Party continues to bring out to the floor in order to try to destroy.
He wants to eliminate private health insurance.
Okay, let's move on because we have a lot of other issues to get to. Kevin O'Connor, the president has said there is not systemic racism in the criminal justice system in the United States. Do you agree with him?
I don't know what systemic racism means. There's certainly racism in America, and that's included within the justice system.
You're not sure what it means?
I think you have to look at each particular program. I think there are certainly biases historically that have existed, and I believe there's racism not just in the justice system, but throughout our society. What I disagree.
What would you do about it?
Enforce the law. Enforce the law. What I wouldn't do is what Senator Markey's done, which is basically to try to divert attention from the failed social programs and the failed teachers union schools that he is backing, where he would eliminate choice. He wants to divert attention from those failed programs and vilify police officers. He's done it throughout this campaign because if he can't blame our cops, then we look at his record in terms of failed social programs and failing inner city schools.
Senator Markey, you said there is systemic racism, and I know that you signed on with Cory Booker for this Commission on Reparations. I wonder, in your time in Congress before this, what have you done to address systemic racism?
Well, I'll just start with my program, the E-rate program, the education rate program. When I was drafting the Communications Act, I made sure that every child in America, especially poor children, had the internet on their desk. And so as a result, for the first time in American history, an educational technology was deployed at the same rate for poor children as for wealthy children. That's my program. It's a $54 billion program. And I'm the leader right now in the United States Senate to have $4 billion additional dollars go to make sure that kids get it at home. Right now, 16 million children in America do not have the internet at home. No, they're mostly brown, Black, immigrant kids. And if they don't have it in their 3rd grade, if they don't have it in their 5th grade, there's 16 million of them, there's going to be a homework gap that leads to a learning gap that leads to an opportunity gap for those kids. And those kids are going to know it. So that's my program. And it goes right to the heart of the educational system. In our
Mr.
country.
O'Connor, do you
Senator
support
Markey,
those
if I
programs?
could respond, Senator Markey
Sure.
has a very weak record on issues of diversity and inclusion. He's been there for 44 years, and you just heard him talk about the Telecommunications Act. That is frankly woeful. We know from the primary campaign that the family of DJ Henry reached out to Senator Markey, and they met with him. And what they were met with was indifference. They felt so disappointed because their senator didn't really even demonstrate care for them. My record is entirely different. I was the first diversity and inclusion coordinator of what was then the largest law firm in Boston 20 years ago. And I was picked because I had proven to be the person that cared the most about making our law firm and our legal community diverse and inclusive.
Would you like to
I have also, just to be clear in terms of the differences, I represented a wrongfully convicted man who spent 20 years in jail for crimes that he did not commit. So I care very deeply about these issues. The answer is not Senator Markey's indifference to the Henry family or vilification of police officers. It's standing up on a sustained
Mr.
basis.
O'Connor, before the senator responds to the DJ Henry thing, doing what you say you want done requires more than, to quote you, enforcing the law. Give us what is at the top of your list of priorities around issues of racism should you become a United States Senator. What's the #1 thing you would do in addition to whatever enforcing the law means?
Well, I think so Senator Tim Scott has offered an excellent bill. It's called the Justice Act. Senator Markey voted against even debating it. So, and it is a police reform bill that uses federal resources to aggregate data and to teach best practices and to promote use of technology in a responsible way. Senator Markey was too busy vilifying cops to even allow that bill to come up for a vote. And just imagine if we had had the opportunity this spring for a nationwide open public debate in what used to be the world's greatest deliberative body to discuss policing and issues of equity and justice, that would have been a great thing. Senator Markey voted against even debating it, just as he's only debating me once, just as he was afraid to debate the Green New Deal, which after offering it in the Senate, he was afraid to even vote for it.
Okay, let's hear
let's go
from
Senator
Senator
Markey.
Markey.
Okay, let me just say, Margery, coming back, I just was going to give you another example, which is the Green New Deal. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I drafted the Green New Deal, yes, the planet's dangerously warming. Yes, we can create millions of clean energy jobs to deal with the problem, but we made it very clear in it that we had to do it with intersectionality. We had to do it by putting frontline communities, minority communities at the front of the line. We can see over in Chelsea. Chelsea has a very high asthma rate because of their proximity to pollution, which made them more vulnerable to the coronavirus. So we made it very clear in the Green New Deal that we were going to prioritize that issue because of the systemic racism built into energy infrastructure in our country. Please just let me finish. And just to go to your point again, Margery, we're 25% of the prisoners in the world, and they're behind bars in the United States. In the world, we're only 5% of the world's population. 1/3 of all women in the world are in prison in the United States. There is systemic racism built throughout our entire criminal justice system.
Gentlemen, if I may, please, we're going to get no, because you're both bringing up the Green New Deal. Margery wants to talk about, but I have one more question for you, Mr. O'Connor. You were complaining a minute ago that Senator Markey didn't even want to bring Senator Scott's Policing Act up for a vote. Mitch McConnell has refused to bring up for a vote virtually anything that's come out of the House. Let's just pick one thing. Should the Senate vote up or down on the HEROES Act, the $2.2 trillion relief bill for America that was passed by the House? Yes or no?
Well, all those bills have been negotiated in advance of the passage. So
Should there be an up
don't-
or down vote in the Senate? Yes or no?
on the House bill? No,
Yes.
No, the Senate will, as it has historically, negotiate.
It hasn't voted on hundreds and hundreds of House bills, hasn't even allowed a vote. Mitch McConnell, should everything be allowed an up or down vote in the Senate, Mr. O'Connor?
Of course not. That would be an enormous waste of time.
Should the relief bill, the HEROES Act, to
No.
provide $2.2 trillion to small businesses, to families, to the airlines, should that be voted on?
They should reach a resolution. Secretary Mnuchin has done a great job getting these bills through with no help from
So is
Senator
the answer
Markey.
no? So the answer is no.
Not 2.2. No,
Okay.
I think it's too
Okay,
high.
No vote,
let's get back to the environment for a second. Senator Markey just talked about co-sponsoring the Green New Deal. Kevin O'Connor, you oppose both the Green New Deal. You don't think that we should get back into the Paris Climate Accord. President Trump, whom you support, as you know, has already gotten rid of 70 significant protections for clean air and clean water. The senator just mentioned Chelsea on Cape Cod, which we all love. Kettle ponds already are too polluted to swim in. The ocean is eroding the land, and little clam shacks that are 80 feet from the water have been wiped out. At least one has been wiped out in Nor'easter 2 years ago. So what do you think we should be doing to protect the environment, especially with a president who calls this a hoax?
Well, so with respect to the Green New Deal, I would note that Senator Markey talks about that as his record, essentially his record on issues of racial justice. That was in 2019. He had been in the United States Senate for 43 years and essentially done nothing. When that bill came up for a vote, Senator Markey, who was the co-sponsor, didn't even vote for it. Only in Washington, D.C., can someone offer a piece of legislation and then lack the courage and conviction to vote for it when it's put up for a vote in his body, and then claim it as his signature achievement. That act in and of itself was an enormous waste of time, and respectfully, it did nothing but diminish the clout of our Senate delegation in the eyes of, appropriately, in the eyes of their Senate colleagues.
But what is your plan for an environment that's in trouble? You know, wildfires, hurricanes, Cape Cod. What do you want to do?
Well, there's a good plan right now that's been put out by the American Conservation Coalition. It strives for carbon neutrality by 2050, unlike the Green New Deal, which even Joe Biden says is completely unrealistic and which is par for the course for Senator Markey, well outside the mainstream of his own party. Unlike that, the governor, the American Conservation Coalition, and others have come forth with a plan, and many American corporations. Carbon neutrality is achievable by 2050. The key is to promote innovation in terms of energy technology. The key is to remain. I don't agree with not being in the Paris Climate Accord. I didn't agree with that deal, but I absolutely agree that climate change is real, and that the way to deal with it is to work with people internationally. 50% of all carbon emissions right now are coming from Asia, and so what we need to do is to have a system that promotes innovation, that promotes sensible negotiations, where the American worker isn't sold out to China the way the Paris Peace Accord was drafted, where we would literally have paid hundreds of millions of dollars to China, and they would have had no emission standards. The net effect is that Senator Markey would have harmed the American worker yet again.
Let him respond,
It was
Mr.
a
O'Connor, if we
terrible
can.
deal.
Please respond, Senator.
Well, you know, when I was a boy, my mother said, don't swim in the Malden River, Eddie. When I was 11, it turned black because of all the polluting companies on the Malden River, with a kind of a pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze over it. So that's when I began to become an environmentalist. And the reality is, because Mr. O'Connor keeps talking about socialism, well, for 100 years, the oil, gas, and coal industries have received tax breaks from the American taxpayers. We've been tipped upside down to give tax breaks to them. When we, in the Green New Deal, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I say, well, let's give those breaks to clean energy technologies, Fox News, the Republicans, Mr. O'Connor, they call that socialism. Well, all we say is, give us some of that socialism that the oil, gas, and coal industry had to wind, solar, all electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, battery storage technologies, energy efficiency technologies, and we will bury the fossil fuel industry and their asthma creating, their greenhouse gas creating dangers to our planet in a generation. But of course, because the fossil fuel industry has the United States Senate as a wholly owned subsidiary, because it has Donald Trump, and Mr. O'Connor is a Donald Trump Republican. He says he's going to vote for him as a wholly owned subsidiary. We can do nothing on this issue. And we know that we can create millions of new jobs. And by the way, Massachusetts, as the innovation capital, will be the leader in creating
Senator, I'm going to hold
hundreds
you
of
there for a
thousands of new
second.
jobs
Mr.
for
O'Connor,
our workers here.
Mr. O'Connor, if you defeat Senator Markey, you will increase the likelihood that Mitch McConnell continues to be the majority leader in the Senate. That's obvious math. What is it that Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans have done that convinces you that anything that you just listed on your agenda of environmental initiatives would even get a vote in the Senate led by Mitch McConnell? What is the environmental policy that you support that Mitch McConnell has allowed his members to vote for?
The American Conservation Coalition's plan is a bipartisan plan. If I have to work across the line to get it done, I'll work across the line. And
Can you name one bill where Mitch McConnell has worked across the line, to quote you, to allow a major piece of legislation in the last few years to allow for there to be a bipartisan vote?
He worked across the line in terms of all the COVID relief bills.
Mhm.
Those were all
No,
bipartisan.
I mean in the environment. I'm talking. My apologies. In the environmental world, can you pick one?
Not offhand, but the reality is that for all Senator Markey wants to run against President Trump, I am running as a Kevin O'Connor Republican. I have articulated for you what my positions will be. They're consistent largely with Governor Baker's positions, who again is endorsing me, not Senator Markey. And I will be a pro-environment senator, and because I, like all of us, have children. I have 4 kids. I'm worried about the future. I'm deeply concerned. But Senator Markey's Green New Deal, that extreme program, is nothing but posturing. There is no future for the United States of America to a carbon neutral path with a successful growing economy without fossil fuel. There's no future for America in any way without fossil fuel.
I will tell you environmental bills that Mitch McConnell has allowed out onto the Senate floor. It's to build the Keystone Pipeline over the objection of environmentalists in our country. It's to make sure that the tax breaks for the oil and gas industry continue while strangling any help for the wind and solar and alternative energy industries. That's where McConnell
Alternative
is
energy
willing.
isn't being
That's where
strangled.
McConnell.
Senator.
Please, would you please, honestly, but I have yet to interrupt you. If you would
Just
allow
continue,
me to
Senator, please.
Thank you. To ensure that his coal state industry in Kentucky just continues. And that's the last thing we need in Massachusetts is to send another Republican down to help Mitch McConnell stop a green energy revolution, stop the expansion of healthcare benefits in our country, to stop ensuring that we have real criminal justice reform and civil rights.
Got to hold you there.
reform.
We've got to
can we-
move ahead.
yeah.
Gentlemen, we have to move
We have
ahead.
a lot
here.
more, we're trying to squeeze in here. So I wanted to move on to immigration. Kevin O'Connor, do you support the dreamers staying in the United States? As you know, those are young people who were brought here by their parents and have made their homes here and lived here for years. Do you support their staying in the United States?
Yeah, DACA, yes, I do. And I think it's a real reflection of Senator Markey's ineffectiveness that he and other career politicians have seized upon this issue for politicization, just like with the Green New Deal, outside the mainstream. I would go to Washington and offer myself as someone who will work with anyone and everyone across the aisle to solve problems.
Okay.
We solve them one by one, and I believe DACA would be a good first step.
So, Senator Markey, you do support the Dreamers, I know. You also favor sanctuary cities and would abolish ICE. So explain your thinking there.
Yeah, well, very simply, yes, we should put all those DACA young people, there are 800,000 of them in the United States, on a pathway to citizenship. They grew up here. We educated them here. They're in the military here. They're in business here. We should not send them back. The temporary protected status immigrants that we have in Massachusetts and across the country, we should keep them here and put them on a pathway to citizenship. But I will go a step further. We have 11 million of these individuals in America. We should create a comprehensive pathway to citizenship for all of them in our country. We shouldn't be trying to create an ICE deportation army to terrorize people on the 3rd floor of a triple-decker in Lawrence or Chelsea or Boston with the fear that there may be some family member who's apprehended. The message that we have to send beginning on January 20th of 2021 is that we're going to pass a comprehensive immigration bill for all 11 million. So that we don't have to have a deportation army. We don't have to have
44
ICE
years
terrorizing people in our country.
15 seconds, Senator, 15 seconds, Mr. O'Connor, then I got to move on. We're almost out of time. Shoot.
44 years, nothing accomplished on immigration. His record is one of complete ineffectiveness. What we ought to do with the DACA issue is address that as a clean bill. And Senator Markey's efforts to vilify ICE are completely irresponsible. What he wants is open borders. He wants to make Massachusetts a sanctuary state. It would bankrupt our state. It would.
Okay,
gentlemen,
very short. I need really.
undercut the rule.
Senator, 15 seconds.
Right, thank you.
Undercut the rule
Honestly,
of law.
I appreciate it. Mitch McConnell will not allow a vote on DACA on the Senate floor. He's the controlling. It would pass if McConnell would allow a vote. He's waiting for someone, for Mr. O'Connor to come down to Massachusetts
Mr.
O'Connor to
Mr.
block any votes
Mr.
on anything
O'Connor,
progressive.
you list yourself as a Second Amendment supporter, but I believe you support the background check law in Massachusetts. Is that correct?
I support background checks. Yes. What I don't.
Would you support a background check law, a high-capacity magazine elimination, and an assault weapons ban on the federal level? Yes or no?
Those issues all depend on the definitions of.
Well, I think they're common definitions. Do you support an assault weapons ban or you don't? Yes or no?
It depends on how that weapon is defined. We have sound laws in Massachusetts, and those laws work well for us.
Would you? Well, that's fine. So we have laws on all three of those things: limiting high-capacity magazines, limiting assault weapons, and background checks. Would you vote for the exact same provisions in Congress?
No, I have issues with some of those provisions.
Wait, you just said you support them here?
No, I said it overall. We have a sound system here.
Senator, the Heller case in 2000, I think it was 2007, established for the first time in our history under the Second Amendment, an individual's right to bear arms, to buy firearms. Do you agree with the court's decision in that case?
My feeling is that under the Second Amendment, the government can impose reasonable restrictions on the purchase of weapons. That includes, in my opinion, assault weapons, high capacity
That case was
magazines.
about banning handguns in Washington, D.C. Do you support the ban on handguns anywhere?
I do not believe that that handguns should be banned, but I do believe that everyone should have to go into a police station to get permission from a police chief to buy the gun. That's the Massachusetts law. That's why we have the lowest gun fatality rate in the United States.
Got it.
That's the law that has to exist in Washington. Mitch McConnell will not allow a vote on my bill
Gentlemen.
to make sure that that's the standard because NRA should stand for not relevant anymore in American politics, but the NRA owns the Republican Party in Washington and in the Oval Office.
2.5 minutes.
Slogan, Senator.
Final question for each of you, Margery.
You know, Kevin O'Connor, you mentioned several issues tonight where you're very far away from President Trump: the Dreamers, abortion, the environment, and part of the Affordable Care Act. So why do you support him?
Because President Trump represents the best opportunity for us to have safe neighborhoods, not open border sanctuary states, not defunding and disarming of the police the way Senator Markey advocates. He offers the better alternative, the better choice in terms of restoring our economy. He has had an excellent economy heading into 2019, and we're coming back strong. And
Okay,
he's got a better economic program. He also stands up for
Quickly.
American defense. Senator Markey has a very weak record and a misguided record on foreign policy.
We're running out of time. Senator, a last final question for you, if I can. The two highest profile initiatives you have, the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, again, are not supported by the candidate of the Democratic Party. So what's the strategy? Is it because you believe that Joe Biden will all of a sudden have an epiphany, or is your intention to work around the man you hope will be president? You have 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Well, I support the Green New Deal and I support Joe Biden. I mean, the climate denier commander-in-chief is in the Oval Office. So obviously, the Green New Deal has shifted the whole discussion, not only in the United States, but around the world. And now the goals have been, we've lifted the gaze of Americans and political leaders to the constellation of possibilities in green energy technologies. Joe Biden has moved a long way over the last year.
Gentlemen.
I'm going to continue to advocate for the Green New Deal so that we can implement a plan that saves all of creation while engaging in massive job creation.
Gentlemen, we're out of
maybe you
time.
should vote
Mr.
for it
O'Connor,
next time.
our apologies, but the hour is up, and we thank you both for participating. We thank all of you for watching and listening. And as I said, thanks to the candidates, Senator Ed Markey and Kevin O'Connor, for participating in this GBH News debate.
And if you're in our online audience or listening on 89.7, please stick around. Joe Mathieu and our political team are standing by to continue the discussion.
Margery and I will be joining them in just a few minutes as well. And don't forget, please, Election Day is November 3rd. But if you're voting by mail, be sure to post your ballot or get it to your local drop box as early as possible. I'm Jim Braude.
I'm Margery Eagan. Thanks so much for joining us
Thank you.
tonight.
This is GBH Radio, special live coverage as Senator Ed Markey and his challenger Kevin O'Connor argue the issues for 1 full hour in the only debate in the Massachusetts Senate race. I'm Joe Mathieu. Thanks to our moderators, Jim Braude and Margery Eagan, who helped us learn a lot about the candidates tonight and where they stand on the biggest issues of the day.
How would you grade both of them?
I think the grades are both incomplete. I think that they each have done things well, and I'm sure in hindsight they would look back and do things differently. I do favor opening up safely as soon as possible. I'm very concerned about the collateral consequences of being closed.
First, I would give Donald Trump a complete failing grade for the way in which he's handled the coronavirus. He's been criminally negligent since January.
Of course.
With regard to Charlie Baker, I would say that his grade is incomplete.
Markey and O'Connor meeting on the GBH debate stage at a precarious time in our history. A divided nation, 1 month before a national election. The President of the United States infected with COVID-19. Cases and deaths rising here in Massachusetts and around the country. Tens of millions unemployed. The climate in crisis. This is why we are invested in this debate tonight and in this race, to help you make the best informed decision you can in November. This is 89.7 GBH Radio with a full hour of analysis in special coverage straight ahead.
living through a pandemic.
Being in quarantine has been a roller coaster of emotions for me.
The hardest thing to cope with has been just the extended time I've had to worry about things.
During a pivotal year.
It's definitely not the senior year I expected.
The typical pressures with so many additional unknowns.
Sometimes I just feel lost and I have no clue what's going to happen next.
We follow the story from the GBH newsroom, our year-long series, COVID in the Classroom, only on GBH News.
Today at WGBHnews.org, we've all come to take high-speed internet for granted. Well, unless you live in Worcester. If you missed it on the radio, it's online at WGBHnews.org right now.
Trusted, local news. This is 89.7 WGBH, WGBH HD1 Boston, online at WGBHnews.org. Boston's local NPR.
Good evening and welcome to special coverage from GBH News, the 2020 Massachusetts Senate debate. I'm Joe Mathieu. Tonight we assemble the full GBH News political team to analyze what we just heard and dig deep on the issues so you can make the best informed decision in this election.
You know you're a Donald Trump Republican when you don't wear a mask yourself in public, like Mr. O'Connor.
I do favor opening up safely as soon as possible.
You know you're a Trump Republican when you're not willing to talk about the magnitude of the climate threat to our planet and what the solution should be.
Someone said to me recently, there's nothing more expensive than a free lunch. Ed Markey, throughout this campaign, has proposed these free lunch programs.
You know you're a Trump Republican when you support steamrolling a Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, through the Supreme Court.
I don't support the Affordable Care Act. I support the system we have in Massachusetts.
So that the Affordable Care Act, Roe versus Wade, environmental protections will be on the chopping
Mr.
block.
O'Connor, quick
Just
response.
to be clear.
Just some of the highlights from what was the first and last debate between Senator Ed Markey and his Republican challenger, Kevin O'Connor, here at GBH News. Thanks to our moderators, Jim Braude and Margery Eagan. I'm Joe Mathieu. Over the next hour, we'll be joined by some of the best minds in Massachusetts politics to give us their reactions to our debate tonight. I'm joining you tonight from inside Studio 6 at GBH News, just across the building from the debate hall. Our panel tonight will join us via Zoom, along with several hundred listeners and viewers who registered to join us in our virtual studio. Welcome to all of you. We'll be taking some of your questions over the next hour and even polling you tonight, as you've already seen internally here on Zoom, on some related issues. We'll handle that virtually throughout the hour, and I'll share some of those results during the broadcast as well. So let's get started. First up tonight, we are joined by Kadzis and Reilly, GBH News senior editor and columnist Peter Kadzis, and political reporter Adam Reilly. We're also joined tonight by GBH reporter Soraya Wintersmith, who spent last weekend on the trail with the two candidates, hearing their closing arguments on the eve of our debate. Good evening to all of you and welcome.
Good evening, Joe.
I'm going to start with some questions about style and substance. Adam, let's start with you. Senator Markey had, 4 debates under his belt before tonight, with Joe Kennedy, of course. Kevin O'Connor had none. He's the newcomer. Did Ed Markey's experience show?
I didn't see a moment this evening where I felt like O'Connor was really making Markey sweat. That might be a function of the experience gap. I think Markey actually debated Joe Kennedy 6 times and debated Shannon Liss-Reardon, who then dropped out of the race another time. O'Connor said he wanted 7 debates. The Markey people said, no, we think 1 is fine to highlight the differences between you and our guy. So maybe it's a question of poise. It could also be that the case O'Connor is trying to make doesn't necessarily resonate or isn't one that throws Ed Markey off his game. I mean, Ed Markey, throughout the primary, and this gets back to your idea, Joe, throughout the primary, he embraced positions that were on the left of the Democratic Party. And when Kevin O'Connor comes out and says, you're out of the mainstream, you're palling around with AOC or Bernie Sanders or whoever, for Markey, that's a strength. So I don't think it's something that makes him anxious or makes him flustered, which is a long way of saying, I think you may have a point.
Soraya Wintersmith, as I mentioned, you were with both candidates last weekend. It's one thing to see the candidates on the trail with their supporters making their pitch. They're surrounded by people who in many cases want to hear from them. You've seen an experienced senator on the primary trail, now on the general election trail, and this newcomer, Kevin O'Connor, who's been swinging at Ed Markey to the best of his ability. On the debate stage tonight, how did that translate to a more formal setting? And did anyone win?
I don't know that it's appropriate for me to declare a full winner. I think the voters will decide that. I do think that Mr. O'Connor, trying to paint himself as a common sense, middle of the road guy, missed some opportunities in this formal setting to really do that. I think that I tend to agree with Adam that mostly O'Connor didn't hit Markey as hard as he could and make him sweat. But I think Mr. O'Connor making the point about court packing and hitting Markey on not showing very good restraint. I think that he probably surprised a lot of people with his environmental justice list of policies.
Did he effectively introduce himself, Saray? If you could argue the biggest job for Kevin O'Connor tonight was to get in people's living rooms, let them know who he is. Did he do that?
I think that he still is trying to define himself on the campaign trail. He's frequently asked, what kind of Republican are you? Or are you aligning yourself with Trump or Baker? I think him trying to forge his own path probably would have been better started before the September primary, because now there's like a 600,000 vote gulf between himself and Markey when you look at who voted during the primary. I don't know that if this is the one shot that he nailed, being explicit about who he is and how he's different than the Republicans that Massachusetts knows.
Peter Kadzis, you've been covering Ed Markey for a long time. He's been on Capitol Hill for more than 40 years. He's found himself in some of the toughest races of his career, arguably pretty late in his career, having just come through a pretty intense primary campaign, of course, with a decisive victory for Ed Markey. Was that the election? Was it the primary election? Or is this exercise about more than vetting issues tonight?
Well, it's a real mismatch. You've got Ed Markey on stage after besting a Kennedy in Massachusetts. It's like, you know, if Ted Williams played another season after, hitting over 400, O'Connor's got a thankless job. Markey merely had to continue being Markey, which he did very well. And by the way, that is a person who was very much more to the left than many in Massachusetts. But let's not forget, Massachusetts is, very friendly to Bernie Sanders. It's arguable that AOC's endorsement put him over the top. I have no problem saying that Markey won. O'Connor has two huge problems, and their names are Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. You listen to O'Connor talk about Senator Markey being outside of the mainstream, but you can't clobber Senator Markey with Joe Biden. All you have to do is whisper Trump or whisper McConnell, and anyone associated with them is statewide a dead duck. Listen, I learned some very interesting things about O'Connor today. The fact that he thought we should have stayed in the Paris Climate Accords. He has a moderate but sensible position, on some environmental matters. The fact that he wants to retain pre-existing conditions, those are all good things. But what stands in the way of those things? Again, two names, Trump and McConnell.
There's a lot there, Adam Reilly. First of all, do you call a winner tonight? And boy, what difficult timing, frankly, for Kevin O'Connor. If this had been 1 week ago tonight, it would have been a very different conversation. Just as this debate was starting, I'm looking at Donald Trump walking out of the Walter Reed Medical Center on live TV.
Yeah, telling people not to be afraid of COVID, right?
Mhm.
Which is where the debate began, which I don't think is something that is beneficial to O'Connor, since in Massachusetts, people like what Governor Baker's done, what Mayor Walsh has done, what other elected leaders have done, and that's a very non-Trumpian approach. I'll call Markey the winner because, as Soraya pointed out, O'Connor is the one with all the ground to make up. In a presidential election year, Joe Biden is going to get way more votes than Donald Trump here in Massachusetts. It passed his prologue. Most of the people who vote for him are probably going to vote for the Democrat unless the Republican gives them a reason to shift course. And I didn't see O'Connor do that today. A point that I think both Soraya and Peter brought up, which I think is really worth emphasizing, is the impression I got watching O'Connor in this debate was that he is, in fact, a moderate Republican, a Charlie Baker kind of Republican, who has not, for the most part, been pitching himself that way in this campaign, because that's not where the Massachusetts GOP is.
Mhm.
The Massachusetts Republican Party is the party of Donald Trump, not the party of Charlie Baker. And the press releases that I've gotten from Kevin O'Connor's campaign don't talk about his relative moderation on the environment or on gun control. They don't talk about what seemed to me to be his general acceptance of the idea of systemic racism in the criminal justice system. Even though he balked at attaching that phrase to it, I thought he went on to essentially say, yeah, systemic racism is probably real. It's my paraphrase, my interpretation. That's not the way he's run. Just one other point I would mention. Kevin O'Connor joined up with Robbie Goldstein, a physician at MGH who challenged Steve Lynch in the Democratic primary from the left. Kevin O'Connor made common cause with him to say, essentially, the state's signature requirements for getting on the ballot are inappropriate right now in the age of COVID. We need to change those signature requirements. One other candidate joined with them, and they won that case. They got the state to back down. Kevin O'Connor brought that up when I talked to him a couple of days ago for a debate preview piece as an example of his ability to work across the aisle.
Mhm.
He didn't bring it up tonight. He wasn't asked about it, but if you want to talk about it, you got to find a way to make the moderators let you talk about it. So I'm not sure that he's been branding himself as the kind of guy he really is. And I wonder if he wouldn't have more success if he ran as a Baker Republican rather than as a Trump supporter.
Let's get to the issue that you mentioned, and I'd love to hear from you on this, Peter Kadzis, and that's COVID. It was the top issue that came up in this debate. It's top of mind for most people listening and watching tonight. They were both asked to grade, essentially, to weigh in on the response to COVID on both President Trump's behalf and Charlie Baker. Here's Kevin O'Connor.
How would you grade both of them?
I think the grades are both incomplete. I think that they each have done things well, and I'm sure in hindsight they would look back and do things differently. I do favor opening up safely as soon as possible. I'm very concerned about the collateral consequences of being closed.
Ed Markey also took his turn.
First, I would give Donald Trump a complete failing grade for the way in which he's handled the coronavirus. He's been criminally negligent since January.
Of course.
With regard to Charlie Baker, I would say that his grade is incomplete. He's worked hard, but of course he's been hindered by the fact that Donald Trump did not provide early on the leadership, all the supplies needed.
This followed a conversation, kind of a difficult conversation right at the outset about the use of masks. Jim Braude got into this with Kevin O'Connor a bit. He was photographed, I guess, in the Herald, not wearing a mask on the campaign trail. Peter Kadzis, it's hard to underscore the importance of this issue. Most people have very strong feelings about it one way or the other. Who carried the day on COVID tonight?
Markey did. And I'll tell you, the deck is stacked. First of all, Markey was fairly aggressive in his criticism of Governor Baker. I say fairly aggressive because Democrats rarely speak unkindly of Baker. I think that Kevin O'Connor got off to a really terrible start when he started harping on communist China, how it's all communist China's fault. By the way, he is right. China's duplicity and their failure to deal effectively with this from the start sparked a worldwide pandemic. But once that's said, he sounded like a crazy 1950s Joe McCarthyite guy going, communist China, communist China, communist China. Here's why it's a mistake. That's right out of the Donald Trump GOP playbook. It just won't play in Massachusetts. It might work in Arkansas, and it'll certainly work in certain neighborhoods in Miami, and there's large swaths of Texas it'll work. It just won't work here. It's a sliver of truth that just doesn't translate well. And I don't think that O'Connor, who had some good moments, ever really recovered from getting off on the wrong foot.
So, Ray Wintersmith, this is one of these issues. As I said, people are going to have feelings about it one way or the other. You're not going to get an undecided when it comes to COVID. The timing, as President Trump is walking out of Walter Reed, if you're a Republican and you're talking about COVID in Massachusetts, you're at a deficit, arguably, before the conversation begins.
That's right. I think I agree with Peter. It was off to a bad start. The opening is really one of the points where O'Connor missed making a really stronger case. I think that he could have pointed to us in Massachusetts slowly reopening things. And I get what he was saying about the guidance not having changed in the beginning. This is another thing that I think he did not get across very clearly, even though the president did go and get hospitalized. I don't think that anyone updated any of what the health guidelines were post-hospitalization. And even here in Massachusetts, we're still slowly opening up. This would have been a political point for him to make and introduce himself as a practical guy. I think he also, with the systemic racism that Adam mentioned, the image of balking for people who are looking for a more nuanced take about race and policing, missed opportunity.
If you're just joining us on GBH, whether you're hearing us on the radio or with us on one of our social media platforms, including our virtual studio this evening on Zoom, welcome to special coverage, the 2020 Massachusetts Senate race. I'm Joe Mathieu, and I'm lucky to be joined by the GBH political team for this full hour at the moment. Adam Reilly, Peter Kadzis, and Soraya Wintersmith. The economy was a big part of this, Adam. Attempts to stimulate the economy in the era of COVID. O'Connor suggesting that a $2.2 trillion stimulus is too much, that which was offered by the Democrats, and they were asked to each weigh in on a Republican plan. I wanted to ask you specifically, though, about Ed Markey's plan, and you can weigh in on the stimulus as well. But a plan to give every American specifically $2,000 a month for the duration of the pandemic. This would be, of course, a form of stimulus.
I would begin by repealing the Trump tax cuts. I would begin by repealing the Bush tax cuts.
He was asked here, how do you pay for it?
President Trump is paying $750 a year in taxes, by the way, while getting the best medical care in the world from the federal government, millions of dollars worth of great health care from the federal government. And then we can use those trillions of dollars to take care of ordinary American families who are suffering.
Okay, so you have Ed Markey there on how to pay for that $2,000 payment. O'Connor says, no way.
Someone said to me recently, there's nothing more expensive than a free lunch. Ed Markey, throughout this campaign, has proposed these free lunch programs that are totally unaffordable, that will bankrupt future generations.
How does this play, Adam? Tens of millions of people are unemployed around the country, tens of thousands here in Massachusetts.
I don't know how many people who will like the pitch that Ed Markey made actually believe it's likely to come to pass. I think that ultimately for him to get a chance in the debate to talk up a plan like that is about articulating his worldview and his philosophy of government. And it gave him a chance to say, I think that our response to COVID should be focused on, the people who've suffered most, lower income people, marginalized communities. They're the ones who we really need to find a way to take care of. Again, I'm paraphrasing here, but I think that's what he was shooting for. And it made O'Connor say effectively, no, we don't have the money for that. Well, at the same time, he was put in the position of trying to defend the president's tax cuts. Given the political composition of Massachusetts, I'm not sure how you call that a loss for Ed Markey. I think it works to his benefit. As Peter said, that the deck is stacked against him from the outset here. And economic policy is no different. I think it's also worth mentioning, I loved Margery Eagan's question toward the end of the debate, where she said to O'Connor, and I want to check my notes here. All right, you've talked about racism in the criminal justice system. You've talked about climate change. You've talked about gun control. You don't really sound like a Trump Republican. Why are you backing the president? And I felt like O'Connor sort of froze for a second and then ended up saying, well, I'm backing him in large part because the economy has been doing great. The problem with that answer is that COVID and what I think is fairly described as our botched federal response to COVID has made the economy struggle a lot. If the Dow is doing great, a lot of ordinary men and women don't have jobs, can't pay for their homes, their housing. And that is, I think, a line that Ed Markey was almost certainly thrilled to have Kevin O'Connor give there toward the end. I'm with Trump because he's good for the economy. Again,
getting back to this plan, though.
Good news for Senator Markey. Say it again, Joe.
Okay, sure. Getting back to the plan here and the response, Peter Kadzis, the no free lunch line, that was kind of his one moment. It seemed like that was the one line that he had rehearsed and he was ready to drop it on Ed Markey.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Markey should have been vulnerable on the classic charges of being a big spender. But using the no free lunch line, I don't think rises to that level. I mean, O'Connor should have said, look, Senator, the Republicans want to give, what is it? Is it $1.67 trillion? That's not enough. Maybe it's not perfect, but $1.5 trillion. I mean, he could have had some fun with it, because I do think a weak spot for Markey could be big spending, but Massachusetts voters aren't really going to care about that. They know Markey's a big spender. It's a sunk cost for him. I would say that didn't hurt Markey, but O'Connor really missed an opportunity to throw a zinger there. And a free lunch just doesn't cut it.
I'll give you the final word here, Soraya Wintersmith. Is it about zingers? Is that the point here? There's one game going on, this football game that nobody's watching tonight. This is the real game for a lot of people, but it's, it's obviously there's more than gamesmanship to a debate. Did that resonate with you?
Right. There's no Cam Newton. So this really is the real game over here.
You better believe it. We thought we'd have a ratings challenge until this happened.
Right. I don't know, Joe. I think that unfortunately, because our attention spans are so spread across many things, zingers do resonate with people. And when you miss an opportunity to make a succinct point that really sticks with people, again, you miss the chance to let people know who you are.
I want to thank all three of you guys for being with us here on a special night for local politics and American history. The 2020 Massachusetts Senate debate. Adam Reilly, Peter Kadzis, and Soraya Wintersmith, the GBH News political team. Thank you guys, as always. I hope I
Take
see you
care.
back here around the shop someday. Coming
Thanks,
up this
Joe.
morning, we're going to leave Boston. Listen to me this morning. How about tonight? We're going to leave Boston, head for Cape Cod and for Worcester for a different perspective on this debate. Stay with us on GBH.
You could, I'm off. I mean, they could turn me on, but then.
For 6 months, we've gone through our own ups and downs, knowing that we have a place in the evening to come together and talk about it all. I'm nighttime news anchor Mary Blake. On In It Together with Arun Roth, the show and the podcast, we learn the most important news about our communities and get the best advice from the best experts. On the radio, we can take off the masks and hear each other loud and clear. Join us for In It Together tonight at 6:30 here on GBH 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, offering Medicare Advantage plans with new benefits like telehealth visits, as well as a broad network of doctors, hospitals, and specialists. BlueCrossMA.com/go. And the law firm of Davis Malm. Uncertain times require uninterrupted legal services. Davis Malm is there for you. Learn more at DAVISMALM.com.
Thanks for joining us. Special live coverage here on GBH Radio 89.7 and across our social media platforms, whether you're with us on Facebook Live, YouTube, or Instagram, or Twitter for that matter. We welcome you as we cut through the issues and get to some news here tonight, including the environment.
And we will bury the fossil fuel industry and their asthma creating, their greenhouse gas creating dangers to our planet in a generation. But of course, because the fossil fuel industry has the United States Senate as a wholly owned subsidiary, because it has Donald Trump, and Mr. O'Connor is a Donald Trump Republican. He says he's going to vote for him as a wholly owned subsidiary. We can do nothing on this issue.
Senator Ed Markey speaking to our moderators on the debate stage this evening on GBH. You heard it and saw it live as it happened. Of course, his Republican challenger, Kevin O'Connor, does not support the Green New Deal.
And I will be a pro-environment senator, and because I, like all of us, have children. I have 4 kids. I'm worried about the future. I'm deeply concerned. But Senator Markey's Green New Deal, that extreme program, is nothing but posturing. There is no future for the United States of America to a carbon neutral path with a successful growing economy without fossil fuel. There's no future for America in any way without fossil fuel.
Kevin O'Connor speaking a short time ago on climate change, specifically the Green New Deal, which of course Senator Ed Markey co-authored. It's a big reason why he won the primary. And we're joined now in our special coverage by Mindy Todd, the managing director of our Cape Cod Bureau, and our sister station on the Cape, CAI, along with Carrie Saldo, GBH News Worcester Bureau Chief, who's moderated quite a few debates on her own. Good evening and welcome to both of you. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
I want you to take us out of the Boston bubble. That's my hope for you guys this evening. Mindy, Cape Cod is one of the most politically misunderstood regions in the country. I think we can agree, with a well-known progressive community focused on climate change, focused on the environment, among other issues, of course, but also a reliable conservative base in the middle of the Cape. That's fertile ground, Cape Cod, for both candidates.
For sure. And I think a lot of people don't realize, when you look at our delegates to the legislature, they're mixed, and they have been for a long time. We're sort of kind of 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans. And I was really kind of curious to hear what Kevin O'Connor would have to say this evening. And I think the first segment summed it up pretty much. I feel like he did miss an opportunity. When Margery asked that question specifically about the Cape and the environment, I was like, oh, great. And at first he didn't answer the question. And then, he really just criticized Markey. We didn't really get to hear any, real positions on where he stands. He did say that, he would look for moderate but sustainable solutions. But I feel like he did miss an opportunity in letting us know who he is and what he stands for. I felt that was true for most of the debate. He continually was more criticizing of what Markey would do rather than what he would do. And I really was looking forward to hearing a little bit more substance from what his position would be.
So arguably, Mindy, more detail would have made more
Exactly.
news on Cape Cod tomorrow morning.
I think so, yes.
Carrie Saldo, you're no stranger to the debate stage. It's great to have you here, by the way, and welcome to GBH News. If I could say this formally, as you cut the ribbon on our Worcester Bureau a couple of months ago, we've, of course, never been in the same building because of the age we're in. But we're delighted that you're here, and you're bringing a slightly different perspective as well. When we think about Worcester, nearby towns like Shrewsbury, that have a pronounced Republican base, some people call it Charlie Baker country. Is that going to play well for Kevin O'Connor on a night like tonight?
I think that it might. If we look at the 2016 election and where people fell in central Massachusetts when it came to voting for President Trump, 40 or 41 communities in central Massachusetts supported President Trump. So tonight, when we heard Markey jabbing Kevin O'Connor on, he's a Trump Republican, I don't think that that could play well for O'Connor in some of those communities. Now, that's not to say that Worcester and Worcester County doesn't have a lot of true blue support. It certainly does. We're in Massachusetts. That's no surprise. But for all the discussion that we had between Soraya and Adam and Peter about the failure for O'Connor to choose a lane and how that might make it hard for him on the GOP highway between Trump and Baker, I think it could be helpful in the Worcester community.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to go through there, Carrie, and we can maybe pick through some issues beyond the climate, as we already talked about. How about healthcare? Medicare for All has been a big issue for Ed Markey. It's one that has resonated among progressives in Massachusetts, and it got a lot of talk on the primary trail. We have a pretty good sense of where Ed Markey is, as we did hear him get to this.
Medicare for All is the way in which ultimately we have to go. Yeah, step one is let's protect the Affordable Care Act from being eviscerated by Donald Trump and by people like Mr. O'Connor. But then let us make the transition to a point where everyone in our country is able to access the health care which they need for their families.
This led to a conversation about pre-existing conditions. It's something that President Trump likes to tweet about, but has not put forth a plan about. And Kevin O'Connor was asked about that.
Well, it will be a priority for me as a senator. President Trump has been very good in terms of fighting for prescription drug price reductions and also for greater transparency in terms of
what has he done on
healthcare
pre-existing conditions except say he supports them at the same time that his Department of Justice is part of a lawsuit to eliminate them?
Yeah, I don't agree with the pursuit of that lawsuit. I think it's ill-advised.
So back to the Trump Republican idea. I'd love to hear from both Mindy and Carrie here. That doesn't sound like one, Mindy.
Sorry, I lost you right there at the end, Joe. Go ahead, Mindy.
Well, when we start talking about a Trump Republican, that did not sound like one there, did it? When it comes to pre-existing conditions, healthcare reform, he may not support the Affordable Care Act, but he's also not talking like Donald Trump when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, that was sort of one of the, where they were saying, Markey was saying he's a Trump Republican. There were several things that were brought up in the first segment that didn't make him sound much like a Trump Republican. They say more like a Baker Republican. I think that was part of an issue this evening for him was what kind of, and he gets, as Soraya was saying, he gets asked a lot, what kind of Republican are you? Yeah. I'm not 100% sure we were made clear with his answers this evening.
Well, he likes to say I'm both, Carrie, or he says, I'm sorry, he likes to say I am my own Republican. I am a Kevin O'Connor Republican. I am not a Trump or a Charlie Baker Republican. Does it matter in central Massachusetts? How popular is Donald Trump right now versus Charlie Baker, said to be the most popular governor in the country? Can't do much worse than siding with that.
Yeah, that's exactly a discussion I was having.
Much better, I should say.
With one of my editors today, is the red more Baker red now that here we are facing this presidential election, or is it more Trump as we're facing the presidential election, I should say. I want to go back to healthcare for just a half a second. We heard issues of asthma raised by Senator Markey. That's a huge issue if I go further west into Western Massachusetts for people in Springfield. So certainly people are going to be, paying a little more attention in Springfield when they hear that issue come up. But COVID is a huge issue for people in Worcester right now. They've been in the red zone for weeks. And so when at the beginning of the debate, when we heard both candidates talking about where they are on COVID, I certainly would gander a guess that people in Worcester were paying very, very keen attention to that exchange.
I want to bring up some of the polls that we have been running virtually and kind of in the background of our conversation now with a lot of people who have joined us in our virtual Zoom studio here. And it begins with a question pretty simple. Do you feel you learned more tonight about each candidate's position? I'm glad to say 81% said yes. Of course, that's why you're here. 13 said no. 6 are unsure. And I don't know what they were watching necessarily, but how would you describe media coverage? This is a good one of the 2020 Senate race. Non-existent or lacking. 7% said non-existent. 51% said lacking. Mindy Todd, you've been working in the news business for a while. Are we at the point in Massachusetts where we don't cover certain races because we think they're predetermined? This is the only debate.
Yeah, that's there's the key right there. This is the only debate. I think I've seen, we've been hosting debates as long as I've been doing my show the last 19 years. We always do, the state Senate and representatives and what have you. I don't think there's enough opportunity for the candidates to debate as much as there used to be. And some of the newspapers, don't do the interviews that they used to do with the candidates, kind of striking up the differences. I certainly feel like, the candidates, I don't feel they do get as much media coverage. I would say in-depth media coverage as they once did. Certainly there are some news outlets that do a better job of it than others. But yeah, I think that that's absolutely true.
This is why we're here, Carrie Saldo. We also asked, have you found it difficult to access information on the candidates regarding the Senate race? 32% said yes. That always kills me. There's something called Google. There's a thing called the internet. If people want to learn, they could access this information. It's a lot easier than it used to be, Carrie.
Well, it depends on how quickly or how easily you want to be spoon-fed, I suppose, Joe. I mean, if you're not real big on using the old fingers to hit the Google, then that's going to be a problem for those folks, or Twitter or Facebook, or can we just go through the possibilities for folks out there? But it's a real issue. I was talking to people today, a range of people, whether it's everyday voters, political consultants, or elected officials here in Central and even Western Massachusetts. And a couple of them did admit, hey, look, I live and breathe this. And I was a little, I sort of forgot that there was a debate tonight. Now, certainly it'll be all over the place tomorrow. So maybe that'll increase visibility for folks if they wanted to do something else with their time in the form of maybe football this evening. Probably not, right though, Joe?
I can't imagine why you'd want to do that. It's not even a real game without Cam Newton. I'll tell you what, though, we have a couple of other poll questions that we're going to let run for a little bit of time here, including the biggest factor in your vote and whether you think President Trump's hospitalization will affect the outcome of the 2020 vote. And we'll share results from those two polls coming up toward the end of the broadcast. I'd love to hear from each of you one more time before we wrap up. Mindy Todd, what makes news tomorrow morning in this race? With a month left and so much happening in the world right now, do these candidates break through with a headline?
I was thinking about that, thinking specifically for my region. I think, the COVID stuff obviously is on everybody's minds, but from my particular region and some of the issues I was hoping to hear, we did not hear tonight. So I was a little disappointed about that. But I think
what were they?
Well, I think for one thing, for us, the infrastructure, I mean, the broadband, high-speed broadband, the bridges, our roads, which is really a statewide problem. It's not just the region. Also, water. We're all about water. Margery touched on it. Where she talked about the kettle ponds, but our wastewater infrastructure, which is approaching what 3-point-something billion and growing all the time. Those are big issues for us that I think I would have loved to have heard a little more about.
I know that broadband issue is a big one,
Huge.
Carrie. The further you go west as well, it's one of these kind of deals on the extremes of our state. What resonates in Worcester and Shrewsbury, as I mentioned, maybe even Springfield, Carrie, you know that neck of the woods so well. After hearing what you did about mask wearing, about protocols, and even about the environment tonight.
Yeah, I think that the internet issue, it was quick that Markey touched on it, but that's a huge one, as you just pointed out, for Worcester. Currently right now, taking a look at whether or not municipal broadband might help them close that digital divide. In parts of the Berkshires, there are still communities, believe it or not, in 2020 that do not have internet access. And the state's been working on this since the Deval Patrick administration. It was a promise that his folks made way back when. So I certainly think that it was a quick mention tonight, but it could pull some headlines. Short of that, it was a contentious Democratic primary out here in Western and Central Massachusetts, where we saw people go for Kennedy, even though Markey won the day. We know that. And I heard from several sources today that while they feel like the seat's going to stay blue, they've moved on. They're making phone calls in other states to help Joe Biden take the presidential win.
How about that? They've already moved on. It was about the primary, wasn't it, in that case? I know you've got a new ball yard. I saw a picture of it today in Worcester, Carrie, so I appreciate your making time for us for our debate tonight. In all seriousness, honored to have Carrie Saldo from our Worcester Bureau and Mindy Todd from our sister station on Cape Cod, CAI. Thanks for bringing your insights to the program this evening.
Thanks for having us.
Coming up next, the moderators. We sit down with Jim and Margery and get their unique perspective straight ahead on GBH News.
Schooling during a pandemic.
This is not going to be a normal school year.
We've been looking at this story from different angles.
Every educator has their own nerves about what model they're doing depending on what district they're in.
Now, local high school seniors take the lead in showing us their journey.
I don't do really well learning online, so we'll see how that goes.
We'll see how pandemic learning plays out for kids moving through high school into adulthood during a pandemic. From the GBH Newsroom, our year-long series, COVID in the Classroom, only on GBH News.
Funding for our programs comes from you and Innuendo in Natick, presenting the Hunter Douglas Season of Style event in their Window Fashions Gallery. Innuendo's staff can help you select the right Hunter Douglas products and offers full measuring and installation services. Innuendo.com. And Notre Dame Healthcare, focusing on the mind, body, and spirit, and providing mission-driven, not-for-profit care where you live. Learn more at NotreDameHealthcare.org. That's NotreDameHealthcare.org.
Special coverage on GBH Radio, on Facebook Live, and the rest of our social media platforms. Thanks for staying up late with us. I'm Joe Mathieu in Boston as we assemble the full GBH political team. This debate night here with Ed Markey and Kevin O'Connor, debating the issues as you heard live, and now is our chance to dig deep into the issues with some of the best minds in local politics, including the moderators themselves. Jim Braude, Margery Eagan, you've had a long day already. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thanks for a great debate. Where to begin, guys? There's a lot to talk about here as we open with regard to style and substance. I'd like to begin with style because you guys had to deal with a socially distanced event this evening. And it's one that you guys obviously had a chance to discuss with the candidates here, but it's not easy doing this in another room, across the room with masks on. Margery, congratulations. Did anybody win?
Oh, it's hard to tell, you know.
Are you allowed to say that?
Well, I really couldn't say because you're so busy making sure things move along and ask your questions and to keep on top of things. I couldn't tell who won, but it was a weird debate. You mentioned usually when we do debates, Jim and I are sitting, you know, at a table and the candidates are on either side. We did the Markey debate with Joe Kennedy in February before this whole thing happened. And it was much more intimate and it was easier to communicate with the candidates. You're looking up at a little screen and they're in a different room from you. And I think it's harder. I don't know, Jim. Didn't you think it's harder when they're not sitting next to you?
I don't think it's hard. I don't know if it's harder. Hi, Joe, first of all, and thanks for having us.
Good to see you.
It's different. I mean, I think our trademark debate, Margery and I have been doing them for a couple of decades, is two candidates, sometimes three, and we sit around the table. There's no podiums. There's no formality. As you know, there's no time deadlines. We hope people are going to be respectful and we try to cut them off if we need to. So it was harder. Having said that, I was dreading the fact that they weren't in the studio.
You were?
I was, because you know this, having somebody physically with you is a totally different interview than interview or debate than if they're long distance, even in normal times, I should say. Having said that, I think it worked out, to be candid, far better than I thought in terms of logistics. Again, even though it's much harder.
Well, we know the format
Harder
matters
for them too when you don't have
absolutely it does
conduct with your opponent. Yeah.
We're looking at it happen with the presidential debates. You know, there's first you get the one with the podiums, then we're walking around the stage like Phil Donahue with handheld mics. Then maybe they're going to be sitting on stools or something, or at a table, shoulder to shoulder, like you guys have done in the past. They all bring out different sides of the candidates, and different candidates shine more depending on the format. Margery, Ed Markey's done a lot of these. He just did one with you, as Jim mentioned, with Joe Kennedy. Was one candidate more at ease, more adaptable tonight?
You know, I thought they both seemed at ease. Kevin O'Connor is a skilled attorney. He's been a lawyer for a long time. Ed Markey has been in Congress for ages, probably done dozens of debates over the years. So I thought they were both. They both seem relaxed, and they both seem ready to go. I don't think I was surprised in anything particular that they said.
That's a pretty big compliment, Jim. If you're going up against a 40-year veteran on Capitol Hill, you've never been in a debate like this before. That's a pretty nice review.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'm assuming it was his first debate because it's first run for office. Now, I have to be candid with you, Joe, when you're asking me these questions. When Margery was talking to the candidates, I was watching the Patriots game, so I don't know what are in those.
First honest guy around.
But I'm sure Margery did a fine job.
The heck's the score anyway.
I think they're losing, aren't they?
O'Connor comes into a debate like this. Any Republican does, doesn't matter how good you are, with such a colossal disadvantage. What are there, like 12 Republicans in Massachusetts?
Right.
Charlie Baker is more popular with Democrats than he is with Republicans. And so when you're Kevin O'Connor, you have to come into this debate saying, I can't win even if I win every single Republican vote in Massachusetts. In fact, if that's all I do, I get crushed. You have to reach out to the middle, the unenrolled, who, as you know, Joe, and Margery knows, there are more unenrolled people than there are Democrats combined. And I think that O'Connor was struggling with, which any Republican would, with, I support Donald Trump, but I don't support a lot of his policies. That's a hard road to hoe. And a Democrat in the state, particularly a long-term incumbent, I think walks in with an advantage. Having said that, for Kevin O'Connor, for his first debate, I thought he did quite well. It's just in this state, when you're running with Trump as baggage, which you are, you have a really steep hill to climb in a debate or in an election. Let me just say one other thing. I saw your poll before we came on. The media's coverage of this race has been abominable.
You think so?
Republican nominee. There is I believe we're the only person on our radio show, and you may have done it too.
Yeah.
Kevin O'Connor even on before his own primary. Maybe I'm missing one. Very little print media coverage and nominee of the party. And, you know, if Charlie Baker can be governor, then a Republican, you know, there was Scott Brown not too long ago. They deserve far more coverage for this race, even if there's
here. And I congratulate you both. Congratulations on making this happen. I mean, that's my God. It was the only, if there weren't for you guys, there would be no debate, and most people would not know who exactly was even running for Senate, for crying out loud.
Well, we're thrilled to do it.
So one of the issues we've not gotten to yet, we've been picking through a lot of these while I suspect you guys were packing up your toys in the debate hall there, but was packing the court. We haven't talked about the Supreme Court yet this hour, and it was pretty meaningful what was said. We'll listen to the candidates very quickly and have you both talk about this. This was something that you guys asked him about, the idea of adding justices to the court, assuming, of course, that President Trump's nominee is confirmed. Here is Ed Markey in his response.
It is very much necessary for us in America to repeal the filibuster and to begin a discussion of enlarging the Supreme Court in order to make sure that what the Republicans have done does not wind up in a fundamental change.
So we added also getting rid of the filibuster. This is Kevin O'Connor.
Court packing is a terrible idea. It's been discredited by everyone. Justice Ginsburg said it was a terrible idea. No one of common sense thinks that Senator Markey's idea is good. And even the Biden campaign thought it was ill-advised. So he's outside the mainstream of his own party, let alone common sense.
This is an important disagreement. Margery, we're talking about hearings starting in a week in Washington.
Right. Well, I think you guys talked, I was listening to you guys before we came on, and Carrie Saldo was talking about Trump's popularity in certain areas of the state, around Worcester, et cetera. But I think one of the things that's difficult for Kevin O'Connor is a lot of Massachusetts voters are not where, I mean, Charlie Baker's done really well because he's a moderate Republican. Scott Brown, the last guy who won the Senate, and a shocker to everybody when he beat Martha Coakley, was a more moderate Republican. He's talking about not having the court expand, and I get why he says that. On the other hand, he's talking about justices whose previous writings and whose writings on the Supreme Court are kind of out of sync with where Massachusetts is. So I think that's kind of weird. He says he's not a Trump Republican, and he disagrees with him on a lot, obviously, tonight. But I think when he's talking about the court in Massachusetts, where there are so few Republicans, I think it may be scary to people to think about what a 6-3 conservative court could mean down the road. And I'm not sure that many Massachusetts voters want that.
Therefore, Jim, Ed Markey sounds mainstream in Massachusetts. And we should note, by the way, that O'Connor supports age limits, not term limits, but age limits on the court.
Yeah, I think Markey's line, and it took a while to get there, when he said was that the Republicans are the ones who are packing the court because of their decision, obviously, not to do anything on Merrick Garland, and then push Amy Coney Barrett in violation of their, whatever their principles were, a handful of years ago. There's so much anger. This is another uphill climb for Kevin O'Connor. If this were an academic discussion, I think a lot of Democrats would have concern about adding seats to the court, but there's so much rage about what has happened by the Republicans and Barrett that probably a lot more people are open to adding seats, even though Joe Biden apparently isn't, than in normal times. And I should say, you know, that Ed Markey went out of his way. We asked him about 12 different ways.
Yes.
To be critical of his nominee, who has different positions on a lot of issues,
including the Green New Deal.
And not once did he take the bait. He was very respectful of Vice President Biden.
I guess that says something about unity here. Margery, we've had a couple of polls going internally here in our virtual Zoom studio, including which of the following is the biggest factor in your vote: national issues, state and local, political party, character and experience, or none, don't know. National issues, far and above. And of course, this is a Senate race. 72% to state and local, 14%. Only 3 people picked political party. So it sounds like you guys were asking the right questions. This is going to be decided on response to COVID, on the Supreme Court, and feasibly on climate change. You also talked about the stimulus to a certain extent. That will decide this race.
Yeah, and I think, as I said before, I mean, I'm a journalist and a reporter and a radio host. I'm not a political strategist. But again, it's hard, I think, in Massachusetts when you are with the president who's so unpopular here on a lot of these national issues that you just mentioned. I think it perhaps was not the best moment for Kevin O'Connor when he kept talking about the Communist Party in China, you know, just days after we have the president of the United States, who has been kind of playing with matches with mask wearing and social distancing for 6 months now, and then he gets sick himself. I think to a lot of Americans, his handling of the virus has not been very good, and now he's got it himself. So that seemed a little. That I don't know that I'm not sure whom that resonated with.
Can I echo, Joe, what Margery said?
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. O'Connor came in deciding that he was willing to part ways with President Trump on the environment, on abortion, as Margery said at the end. And
Dreamers?
If I were a Republican strategist, I would say the one issue you have to separate yourself from the president on is his handling of this coronavirus. Has been an unmitigated disaster from beginning to end. So if I were to pick a bone with any of Mr. O'Connor's answers, I would say the one where he said it's an incomplete grade.
Yeah.
I think the grade is in, and President Trump has failed to protect the American people in virtually every way. And that's probably going to cost them a few points.
We asked our
assessment of the candidacy.
The other poll question we asked our listeners and viewers about, Jim, sorry for interrupting, is do you think
okay.
President Trump's hospitalization, to your point, will affect the 2020 vote? If so, who will it favor, Trump or Biden? 28% said it will not affect the vote. 21% said, yeah, it'll favor Biden. Only 7% said it'll favor Trump. We only have time for one more here for both of you, and I'd love for you to both take a swing at this. You've been preparing for this debate for quite a while, and it dawns on me here that the whole ground shifted under your feet right before you conducted this debate, and that goes for the candidates as well. What we saw on Friday was something we'll never forget. It evolved through the weekend to be this incredible passage that stole the nation's attention and created a new backdrop for your debate. So I wonder, Margery, how did it change the feel, the environment, and maybe even your questions tonight?
Well, the first question was about masks. And I think that it did change everything, because what you learned is that a president who has not been wearing a mask, but who was surrounded by people that were supposedly tested for the coronavirus, got coronavirus anyway. So I think it made us much more cautious tonight in where we were sitting. I mean, Jim and I had a big piece of plexiglass between the two of us, and we were very far apart. And the candidates, as we said at the beginning, were in different rooms. So I think the dangerousness of this virus really has hit home to a lot of people over this weekend.
Did it create a sense of urgency, Jim? It does something in the air. It changes the way people communicate.
And it also makes so many issues that would otherwise, Joe, be high on people's list way down. The GBH poll, whatever it was, a month or so ago, on a whole variety. Was it in the mayor's race? Oh, yeah, the mayor's race. And Boston is a microcosm. What do you care about? Coronavirus, high numbers, high double digits, virtually everything else barely on the screen. And that's why we started with it and spent a lot of time on it. When 200,000 people are dead and the president is this cavalier about it, this is where the action is.
What a thought. There's a lot to talk about here. Do you have a sense of what's going to make news tomorrow? Can you do that on your own debate, Margery?
I think that brilliant moderators and contentious candidates. That's what I would say.
They made news themselves.
All right.
I do think coronavirus. I think the exchanges on coronavirus will certainly be in played heavily in the stories in tomorrow's paper, I think.
In closing, I don't know, Annie, if we can get that poll back. I had one more question on there, which was about voting timing. We're doing this, by the way, in the middle of an election with our mail-in voting taking place. I don't know if it's possible to spawn that. I wish I was smart enough to do it. But that, of course, is another factor here. Here we are with our final poll. When will you cast your vote? Pretty simple. My ballot is already in the mail. 0 tonight, which says a lot about the people who decided to learn more about the issues. I will mail my ballot, 38. I will vote in person, 45%. We just have a minute left here. Margery, does mail-in voting also change the backdrop for this election? Some people have already decided and are watching the Patriots.
You're going to regret that question, Joe. Go ahead.
Come on now.
I'm not worried at all about fraud. I'm worried about someone didn't fill it out, didn't cross a T or dot an I. Their vote was disqualified. That's what I'm worried about. I am voting in person. I think anybody who can should vote in person, because I think it's too big of an election to start this whole new thing in such a huge way all across the country.
But Jim, it also means that people decided who to vote for before they saw President Trump go to Walter Reed.
Yeah, Jennifer Braceras on our radio show today said that's a real problem with early voting. Early voting has a lot of things to recommend it. It's got a lot of problems with it because, as we've learned in the last just week, look what's happened literally over 7 days. So I'm with Margery. I'm concerned about the timing and the post office and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if you're going to vote by mail, the solution is to do it early. And if there's a drop box near you, go dump it in. Yep.
Jim Braude, Margery Eagan, great job tonight. And thank you for staying up just a little bit longer with us here. in our special coverage of the 2020 Massachusetts Senate race. I'm Joe Mathieu. Thanks for spending some time with us. Thanks for your smart questions this evening and helping to make all of this work here on the radio and on our social media platforms. Thanks to all of our panelists, the full GBH News political team, and our producers, Annie Schreffler, Andrew Massawa, and Karen Marshall. We'll see you back here on the radio tomorrow on GBH 89.7.
Voting is often seen as a core aspect of our civic responsibility. Experiences of exercising the right to vote and participate in a Q&A following each story. So before heading to the polls this November,
Nice
join us
job,
for
Joe.
Stories from the Stage, Cast Your Vote, Thursday, October 15th. Learn more at wgbh.org/events.